Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo developer evangelist. And today I will be talking to you about ODBC. So before we dive right into ODBC, just a brief highlight of what Xojo has for built-in database support. So all licenses have access to the SQLite database, which I've talked to you about in other videos. And then all other licenses, excluding the Lite license, have access to many more databases. So you can use Postgres, MySQL or MariaDB, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and of course, the one we're going to talk about today, ODBC. So what is ODBC? Well, it actually stands for something. It stands for Open Database Connectivity. And believe it or not, it was actually created by Microsoft in the early 1990s. But now it's an industry standard, so it's not just owned by Microsoft. It's used by lots of different things. You can read a bit more about ODBC on its Wikipedia page. And ODBC is supported on all our target platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux. It is primarily a desktop type thing. It would work with web apps as well, but you cannot use ODBC on any type of mobile device. So connections, what's required for connections? Well, with Xojo, you're going to need to make sure you have the ODBC plugin. It's included with Xojo. It's already set up in your plugins folder in the initial installation. So it should already be set up, but you do need to have that plugin in place in order to work with ODBC. And then the second part is that you're going to need an ODBC driver for the database you want to communicate with or connect to. And these are always available separately. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the driver must match the architecture of the app. So a bit about drivers. Where can you find drivers? Well, depending on the operating system, you may find that there are some ODBC drivers built in. I think that's really on Microsoft Windows that may have a few built in. You may find that if you install certain apps, you may get some ODBC drivers. In the past, installing Microsoft Office used to install some ODBC drivers for connecting to things. I'm not sure if current versions of Office still do that. You can always go directly to the database vendor. Usually on their page, they will have some sort of download area where you can grab an ODBC driver. Or you can try a third party, which makes ODBC drivers. And a couple that have drivers that work with a variety of database types. Actual Tech has drivers that work on macOS, very handy for connecting to a variety of things from macOS. And OpenLink also offers a wide variety of drivers that you can access. And I do want to point out the architecture matching. That means that if you do get a driver, if your app is a 64-bit app, your driver needs to be 64-bit. If your app's a 32-bit app, your driver needs to be 32-bit. They do need to match in that manner. So how do you use ODBC from within Xojo? Well, it's pretty straightforward. You'll need the ODBC database class. As I said, the plugin gives you access to that, which you can find the docs for it here. And then on the operating system side, you're going to want to configure a DSN, that's a data source name, to tell the driver the information it needs to be able to connect to the database. On Windows, there's an ODBC data source administrator control panel that you can use. And Mac also has a equivalent tool, the ODBC administrator utility, that's in the utilities folder, that's in the applications folder. And then you can just connect to the DSN, which will then connect to the database. And once you do that, you can use the Xojo database classes just as you would with SQLite or Postgres or any of the other databases that are built in. So let's switch over and take a look at a few examples that are using ODBC. Actually, I'm going to be doing this from Windows because it generally has better ODBC support, and one of the databases I want to connect to is installed on Windows. So here I have Xojo open, and one project I have open here is one that's just going to iterate through all the ODBC data source names that are set up on the operating system. Now, I mentioned the ODBC control panel. Fastest way I found to find it is to search, and then it comes up here, and then you can click it, and you get this rather old-looking control panel where you can create your data source names or configure them or do whatever. So you can see here, these are the data source names that I've set up on this system. And one of the first ones we'll look at is probably that one. So just so you can see what that looks like. This one's going to connect to an Access database. So I just gave it a name, and then I told it the name of the Access database file. And didn't really need anything else in this particular case. Now, this project essentially is just going to show you these names that are here. So you can see that's useful if you have multiple data source names and maybe you want to let the user choose one. And you can see to do that, there's a method on the ODBC database class called data source names that'll return a record set that you can then loop through to get the values to display. So pretty simple there. But how do you actually use ODBC to connect to a Rail database? So this example here is going to connect to that Access database. So you can see here, connection code is pretty straightforward once you have your DSN set up. So you create your new database just like you would with any of the other Xojo database classes. And you set the data source to be the name of the DSN that you've created in the operating system's configuration tool. And then you call the connect method, and that's it. And then once you do that, you can, again, use all the regular database commands just as you normally would with any of the other Xojo database support. So if I run this here, we'll see that it's going to connect to that Access database, and I can see the results. I can click on something. I believe I have this set up to also save. So it'll update that. So the nice thing with this, of course, is that you essentially are adding more types of databases you can use with Xojo just by going through ODBC. And there are a wide variety of drivers. So even for things maybe you wouldn't think of. So this is connecting to Microsoft Access, which on the Windows side is commonly used by some companies for database stuff. So being able to build a Xojo app that can talk to an Access database is nice. You don't have to necessarily convert it to something else. On the Mac side, you'll need to find an Access driver. The actual technology folks do make a driver for connecting to Access from Mac. On the Windows side here, I actually had to go to the Microsoft site and download their little package for the Access ODBC drivers and install them. This installation of Windows 10 does not have Microsoft Office on it, so did not have any Access drivers pre-installed. All right, so one other thing that Microsoft installed gives you, though, is a driver that you can use to connect to an Excel file. So oddly enough, there's an option here. I can use the Microsoft Excel driver, and I can just choose an actual Excel file and query that as if it were kind of a database. A lot of people tend to use Excel as a database, even though it's really not. But if you do have a large amount of data in a spreadsheet of some kind, it is kind of cool to be able to just extract it. So this is this spreadsheet, which I actually can't show you on this computer because I don't have Microsoft Office installed, but it's just a simple spreadsheet with 2 columns, teams and the names, and it's querying it to get the data back. And how is it querying it? Well, if you can dig up Microsoft's full docs on it, but it uses an odd SQL syntax. So you can still use select, but here, this information here, this is the name of the sheet that contains the data. So you have to use the sheet name with the $ and then the brackets around it. And that essentially is going to query the data from the sheet. And then you can just grab the fields from it. Here I'm using IDX field. I think it's possible the column header might be able to be used as a field name. I don't remember offhand, but Microsoft has docs on what sort of thing is supported here because there is some filtering and ordering and some other stuff that is available as well. So an interesting idea for getting at data that happens to be sitting in an Excel spreadsheet. All right, yeah, and Edwin's reminding me that if I do have this project on my Mac, I can actually possibly preview it on a Mac. Yeah, there you go. So you can see it's a very simple spreadsheet with some data there. And as cool as ODBC is, Edwin's also mentioning, why would you use it instead of one of the Xojo built-in plugins or drivers? And generally you wouldn't. You would only use ODBC when you want to connect to something for which Xojo does not have a built-in driver. So in all these cases, Access or Excel or the next one we'll look at, Xojo doesn't have a built-in way to directly connect to it. So that's when you can fall back to ODBC and use that along with a driver and then pretty much connect to whatever it is you want. Many, many years ago when I was doing consulting, I actually had a client that wanted me to connect to a database running on an IBM mainframe server. And I was a little nervous, didn't think that might work, but it turned out there was an ODBC driver that IBM had available for that. Worked great with Xojo. And I was able to do the project. So speaking of something that isn't supported by Xojo, Firebird here is a database. It's an open source database. It's available as both server or embedded. Embedded would be more similar to SQLite. And like I said, it's freely available. It's actually available for all major operating systems. I found it installed much easier on Windows than Mac OS because it was very Linux-like installation on Mac OS. I wasn't actually able to get it running quickly. So I said, you know what, I'm going to stick with the Windows version that I know how to use and work. But essentially here is how you can use Firebird with Xojo. So if I open this window back up, once you've installed Firebird, you get the Firebird interbase driver installed on the system. And then you can create a DSN. So in this case, I've created a DSN. I've pointed it to one of the sample databases that are included with Firebird. And then I've set it up with the default account and password that the initial installation has. And then I have my DSN. I also set up a corresponding one for the embedded test. In this case, I've just copied the database file over to the desktop. And if we go back to Xojo to look at the project, you can see I'm calling a method and I'm just passing in the name of the DSN that I've set up. And then it just assigns that as the data source. And then it works, like I keep saying, just like with any other database. You can use your record sets, write your queries, however the database you're using supports queries. So in this case, I'm having a query from the sample employee database that it comes with. And then I'm looping through the rows and just adding them to the list box. And you can see, pulls it up, displays it there. And if I do it the other way, same thing. So, Firebird, maybe a database that you wanted to use, could be anything else as well. You can always use it with Xojo as long as you can find yourself an ODBC driver. And that is the first thing to search for rather than just say, oh, Xojo doesn't have that built in. Hit the Google, as they say, and start searching, see what you can find. Like I said, many vendors have a driver that is available. In the case of Firebird, the ODBC driver for Windows was available on the Firebird site. I found an ODBC driver for Firebird for Mac, but I was unable to successfully get it to work. It installed properly and all that, but connections failed. It didn't have a way to configure it through a nice way to configure it through the ODBC administrator. You had to essentially put in the commands line by line, and those weren't really listed in their documentation. And my guess is that a few things were not successful. But that is farther along than the last time I looked at Firebird, where there was no ODBC driver. So hopefully some progress is being made there. So that's ODBC. I like to remind people it's available as an option. It kind of makes the number of databases that Xojo supports almost infinite, because there's a lot of databases out there that Xojo doesn't yet support, and ODBC makes it possible for you to use them. All right, we are in 2019 and almost at the end of February. And this year, that means the Xojo Developer Conference. And it's in Miami, Florida, May 1st through the 3rd. A nice warm location with, as you can see, a beautiful view. The hotel that the conference is going to be at is this one on the left, the Marriott on the left, with right on the water with great views of the water. And if you head on over to the website, xojo.com/xdc, you can view the session schedule, including the list of all the presenters and the topics and all that stuff. There's over 30 sessions that are going to be going on at the conference, so definitely head over there to see what you might find interesting. And also to whet your appetite a bit, the video recordings from our last two prior conferences are significantly on sale right now at the Xojo store, and they'll remain at these sale prices up until XDC 2019. So you can grab the videos from the 2016 XDC conference for just $75 and last year's 2018 conference for just $99. There was no conference in 2017. So we didn't miss a year there. So that's a lot of videos you get. Like I said, there's typically 30 to 35 sessions at any conference. So a lot of videos, a lot of time it'll take you to watch them. But you can grab those if you're interested to see what it's like at a Xojo Developer Conference. I'd love to see you there. I can't wait to be in warm, sunny Florida. All right, I can always be reached via email, paul@xojo.com. Love to hear from people for how they're using ODBC to connect to databases that maybe aren't as common as the ones that are built into Xojo. Like I said, I used ODBC to connect to an IBM, I think it was a DB2 database running on a mainframe. And I'm sure lots of people have used ODBC to connect to lots of other databases. It can also be reached on Twitter at Lefevre. And be sure to grab the latest version of Xojo at xojo.com/download. Check out the new features, try your projects, all that fun stuff. And it looks like that's all for today. I want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.